the topic being Yeasts of the Future. Let me invite Sylvie van Zandycke, PhD Director, Sales and Marketing, Brewing Yeast, Bacteria and Nutrients. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause.
Talk about a new generation of yeast, hybrid yeast or superior brewing yeast. So what's a hybrid yeast? So as you all know, there's different yeasts will have different characteristics and produce different type of beer. Now, if you are interested in some characteristics that come from one yeast and characteristics that come from another yeast, there's actually a way to cross the yeast to get the best of both of them, and that's called a hybrid. So the way we do that is by making the yeast reproduce or mate. So when you brew beer, what's happening in your fermenter is what we call asexual reproduction. So the yeast will divide and form a bud. Now, when you do a hybridization, you're actually using sexual reproduction. So you're putting the yeast in front of each other and hoping they will mate and get the best of both parents. So what's the interest of doing or hybridizing yeast? The interest is that you get to create, in a natural way, yeast that are better than their parental strains, right? So what's really interesting for the brewing industry is you can then decide what characteristic you want to enhance. And these could be flavor. This could be about flavor. So let's say you have a great yeast for you have a Weizen, but you want to get more banana. So how do you create more banana? You could use a hybrid where the enzymatic activity that produces that particular flavor is increased. You can also decrease flavor. Let's say you don't want any diacetyl or you don't want any sulfur. You can also do that by hybridizing yeast. Then there is performance. You want a yeast that's able to ferment faster or able to resist to higher temperature. Okay, so resistant to stress. A yeast that can be more tolerant to alcohol. And safety. I will introduce a little bit later a particular yeast that we hybridize so that it doesn't have the diastaticus gene. So it's a saison yeast, but without the diastaticus gene, which can create problem during beer production if the yeast has not finished its fermentation. So it's a natural process, and the best example you already have of a hybrid in the brewing world is the lager yeast. So the lager yeast is actually a hybridization that happened centuries ago. It's a natural hybridization between a Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is a standard brewing yeast, and a Eubayanus from Patagonia. So that's a yeast that's used to the cold climate. And when you mix them both, you end up with a lager yeast. And the lager yeast, as you all know, is able to ferment at lower temperature. So this is an example of hybridization that happened naturally in the wild. So how does hybridization happen? If you look under a microscope and you put, remember you want two yeast, one that has something that you like and the other one with another characteristic, and you want them to mate to create a hybrid, a superior hybrid. So you put them in front of each other, and what happens is they will mate. So that's the sexual reproduction. It's called schmooing, which is super fun to say. So they schmoo, they fuse, and then they create a hybrid yeast. So what's really interesting with hybridization is that it's a natural way of creating superior yeast, which you can also do by using genetic modification. Now, genetic modification is not approved in a lot of countries. It still has a while to go. And currently, we have one genetically modified yeast that we sell in the USA. That's the only country where we sell it. So in order to be able to offer those superior yeast to the rest of the world, hybridization is a real solution for that. And just to show you an example, genetic engineering or genetic modification is a very easy way to get to where you want to go. Hybridization takes a lot longer to get there. So if you were, so puff means phenolic off flavor. So sometimes you don't want that phenolic off flavor in your yeast. So how do you remove this from your yeast? With genetic engineering, it's very easy. You're going to go and get that DNA, that piece of DNA that produced the phenol out. If you want to do it naturally by hybridization, you're going to have to find, this is not, yeah, it's just the pointer is not working. It's okay. You're going to have to find a yeast that has the, you're going to have to cross the yeast that has the phenolic of flavor with a yeast that doesn't have the phenolic of flavor, and hoping they will produce a yeast that doesn't have that phenolic of flavor. So sometimes it can take many, many attempts and hundreds of different yeast to look at, basically under the microscope. So a very slow process, a very fast process. These are examples of hybridization that you find in the wild. Those are real. You see, you can cross a lion with a tiger. On top there, you have the head of a lion, the body of a tiger. At the bottom, you have the head of a tiger and the body of a lion. And those do not happen in the wild because tiger and lion do not live in the same habitat. But that's a perfect example of hybridization if you didn't know what I was talking about. And of course, within the brewing world, you have other raw ingredients that have been hybridized of bread over the years, such as hops and malt. And the purpose is the same, is to produce ingredients that are superior or possess the characteristics that you really want. So hybrid yeast, within the portfolio, within the brewing yeast that we offer commercially, we look at four different lines of products, if you want. The hybrid yeast are, again, superior yeast that are designed to be very performant. Then you have the genetically engineered yeast that are only sold in the US. And then you have classical yeasts, those that are naturally isolated either from the wild, so that's called bioselection, or from a culture collection, or even from a brewery itself. So the hybrid yeast are the one we are currently focusing the most on, because they are, again, offering real solutions to brewers. So as an example, Lallemand Farmhouse was a yeast that we launched recently. That was the first hybrid in our portfolio. So we know we wanted to work with a Saison yeast. We wanted to keep the characteristic of the Saison yeast, which is phenolic and peppery. What we didn't want is that diastatic activity that can cause issues in some breweries, especially if there are cross-contamination. This gene, when it's present in a yeast, it means it can use all of the sugars in the world. So it makes your beer really dry, but it means you have to wait until all the sugars have been used, because if you package without the fermentation being finished, you're gonna risk having fermentation in the package and sometimes even exploding bottles. So how to remove this gene? We used the hybridization technique, and we took the diastatic gene out. It's called STA. But we kept all the characteristics of the saison. And also, we crossed with another yeast that doesn't produce sulfur. So it's a superior yeast because it doesn't produce sulfur, it doesn't have the diastaticus gene, and it's still able to produce all the good flavors that you want from a saison. So this is what I wanted to show you today. I invite you to come to the booth to talk to us about all the other yeasts that we have available in our portfolio. We have a Lallemand brewing booth that we share with our distributor, Zandycke, and we also offer education through the Sibyl Institute of Technology. If you want to talk about that, we are available. And then the last thing I'm going to leave you with is a yeast that we will launch in September at Zandycke in Munich. It's a hybrid yeast as well. If you scan the QR code, you can register to get the information as soon as the yeast is released. And yes, so I invite you to come and talk to us. Thank you.